Hey you, it's true with a 4 AM review of the new Goemon. This Dark SSR is the speediest unit ever released in Evertale, comes in at a whopping 777 speed. Let's see if these are also her lucky numbers when we look at her skill set. The first skill she usually will want to use is her fourth skill that is called Art of Cloning. Costs 3 spirit and is an instant skill. Although the time units are not all that important on that one, I have to say. It adds a shadow double in the next in line of allied reinforcements and then adds another 6 shadow doubles to random places in allied reinforcements. So that is 7 shadow doubles that are added. What are those shadow doubles? They are basically Goemons, but they are lacking this skill. So Art of Cloning is only enabled on the original Goemon, and they also have a different second passive. Afterwards, if there are already 4 allies already on the battlefield, she will send herself back to the very end of allied reinforcements. So she will basically let all her shadow doubles do all the work. Now, of course, this seems like a very strong skill, and it is, although we haven't, of course, discussed what else she can do. But there is a very important restriction on her, and this is the usability of that skill. It is only usable if the user has been on the battlefield since the very start of the battle, or if there are no allied reinforcements. It also cannot be used if there are any shadow doubles among allies on the battlefield or allied reinforcements. So these are some big restrictions. On the one hand, it's not a one-time use, at least. She could pull it off more than once, but only towards the end of a battle. And it also restricts her in her placement, because you kind of really need to run her out front. Which, I mean, she has the super high speed, so she will get the first turn for the foreseeable future. And for wars, this is obviously quite good. But in arena, it kind of restricts you to placing her in the first 4, no matter what, or putting her all the way back to the 20th position. And not even there, it's reliable for her to actually use the Art of Cloning, so she kind of has to be in front. And when there is a unit coming out that is above 777 speed, she might be in trouble, although she has some passives regulating that, so she might always be able to pull that Art of Cloning off if you run her first. Still, it takes up 1 spot in your starting lineup, and the question is it worth it? To answer that, we definitely have to look at her other skills. Her third one is called Assassinate. Costs 0 spirit and 70 time units, dealing 500% damage to 1 enemy. Despite what it says in the game right now, I think this is a visual bug that is showing 600% damage, but she's actually dealing 500% damage only. If the target is not burning, but surviving that attack, they are granted the lethal poison for 999 time units. However, this attack ignores any effects of non-boss enemies that would prevent the target from being defeated, so there are good chances that the lethal poison might not be required. However, this does not ignore armor, so that is definitely something to consider. It also doesn't ignore anything else, really. Quick reminder, lethal poison deals 2 times the damage of normal poison, but other than that, it cannot be purified. And it also ignores passive skills or effects of active skills that would prevent the target from being defeated, other than those that are specifically related to prevent defeat from poison or non-attack damage. This skill unlocks each time the user enters the battle from reinforcements, and then is locked again after each use, so she can only use this once for each entering the battlefield. Of course, she has the kind of fallback abilities, but more on that later. First, we have her stealth skill, which is called Stealth Flank. So far in her skills, we didn't really see much of that, but you will notice that this is a bit of a stealth support unit, possibly taking the spot of Angel Jeanne. This stealth flank skill costs 1 spirit and 50 time units and actually only deals 400% damage to one enemy. However, this also immediately gives one other random ally with a stealth strike active skill the next turn by reducing their current TU to 0. As it is a stealth skill, of course this ignores any enemy status effects, damage reduction effects, revenge passive skills, skin passive skills. Stealth strike skills usually tend to do that. Now her final, or rather her first skill, actually has a very long description. It is called Fireworks, gives 2 spirits, costs 70 time units and affects all enemies, but it only deals 50% damage. At least this ignores any enemy status effects, damage reduction effects, revenge passive skills and skin passive skills, and also doesn't wake up sleeping enemies, which would be a bummer for 50% damage, so there is still some compatibility if some of your enemies are sleeping. This would be a very lackluster skill if it ended there, because it also affects all enemies because they become weakened, which means their next attack will be 25% less powerful. And where it gets really cool is if there is no shadow double next in line in allied reinforcements. This also adds a shadow double to the next in line of allied reinforcements. And if there are 4 allies already on the battlefield, this will also be a skill that pulls herself back to the reinforcements, allowing that shadow double to take the stage. This skill is only usable if this unit's active skill Assassinate is locked, so she always has to use Assassinate first before using that one, which is a bit of a restriction to not let the shadow doubling get out of control. But yeah, this is also a way for shadow doubles of herself to create additional clones. Now that we looked at her active skills, let's take a look at her passives next. Both Goemon and the shadow doubles share the first one, which is called Master Thief. Whenever this unit enters battle, whether at the start of the battle or from reinforcements, this unit gains stealth, a stealth shield, and will endure the next damage that would defeat it with 1 HP. So this is only an endure, no hold ground, and she also doesn't have any way to regain that endure. What also happens is that other allies on the battlefield with stealth strike type active skills are quickened by 30%. Now of course some of today's stealth units already have their own kind of quickening effects, which makes this a little less useful and also not quite noticeably spectacular. But what also happens is that if she enters from allied reinforcements, all non-sleeping enemies are granted the super poison status effect. So that is a kind of nice take there, so the super poison doesn't wake up sleeping enemies. Also at the end of each of this unit's turns, if this unit is not sleeping, it will be granted stealth and a stealth shield. Now we get into the differing territory of Goemon. Only the original Goemon has that second passive that is called Art of Invisibility. Each time she takes damage from an attack and survives until after the end of the turn, she will be granted stealth and will immediately get the turn by having her time units reduced to 0. So that is a very, very nice counter skin right there. That isn't really called counter skin. I guess it's also a stealth skin. Plus, whenever she enters the battlefield from allied reinforcements, which if she uses her force skill up front will definitely happen, then she grants an ally with the lowest time units and a stealth strike type active skill stealth, a stealth shield, and the next turn by reducing their current time units to 0. Now that little specification of the lowest time unit is a bit of a bummer here, because maybe that unit might get the next turn anyways. So the highest or some randomness would actually be stronger here. However, of course, still a nice effect that you can take. Her get turn mechanic is also important because that might allow her to use Art of Cloning again, and if she uses that at the end of the battle, it becomes rather strong, I would say. So if she gets to use Art of Cloning twice, then it's also very decent value, of course. One thing that you can also notice is that there are no passive scalings in her skill set, but for her attacks and her survival, she kind of needs high stats. So yes, as a stealth support, maybe she already provides some value there, but I'm already getting ahead of myself because we still have to cover the second passive of her shadow doubles, and those are actually ephemeral. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. It is the classical skill of this unit is never considered to be defeated by attacks and does not trigger any passive skills of other units whenever it is defeated or sacrificed by any source while on the battlefield. So this is the upside. So that means any of these shadow doubles dying doesn't unlock any savage skills, things like that. Another upside is that this unit will be fully healed after each turn if it takes damage but is not defeated. So what's not to love? Now we come to the downside, which is that this unit will be defeated after any ally or enemy turn if it has burn, super poison or mega poison status effects. Now at least these shadow doubles usually have the stealth shield to protect a little bit from that, so at least there's that, but still rather easy to die to that, especially with all the poison flying around nowadays. And then also a very important point, damage dealt to this unit is increased to 2.5 times the normal amount, so they are super vulnerable to actually dying. They have the endure effect, which should allow them to heal up once at least, hopefully. But yeah, these are absolute glass cannons in the best sense of the word. And unfortunately for glass cannons, they don't have that much damage. Assassinate with 500% damage, Stealth Flank with 400% damage, Fireworks with 50% damage to all enemies. So while you can continue to watch the exclusive preview battles with Goemon on the screen, or usually mostly her shadow doubles on the screen, this takes us to the analysis section, which I will try to keep rather short on this one. Now this Goemon is a bit of a mix, or rather a unit that seems like a child of Odin and Angel Jeanne together. She is definitely better than both of them, but the question is that enough in the meta nowadays? I have one very major concern right away with this Goemon, and that is she needs to be a starter. She has that very high speed, which means, yeah, she can use the Art of Cloning right away, which is nice. But then she falls back to the very back of reinforcements, which is also nice given her skill set. She kind of, the original, wants to be protected and let the shadow doubles do the work, and then hopefully produce more shadow doubles in the end. However, the big issue is, and you will also be able to see that in the battle against the kind of meta team with Cthulhu, her falling back and another shadow double coming in means that an enemy Cthulhu gets the turn straight away, and that in very early in the battle, which on its own is already not so nice, but where it gets even worse is that these shadow doubles are extremely vulnerable to Cthulhu's attacks. So Cthulhu might just get the turn over and over again before any of your other teammates even get the turn. And since they are such glass cannons, also compared to the clones of Earth, Sun, Wukong, even after the onslaught of Cthulhu ends and Cthulhu goes to sleep, the enemies could very easily trigger Cthulhu again by defeating a kind of glass cannon shadow double, triggering some more reinforcements yet again. Now my other concern with Goemon is the very big restrictions of many of her skills. The Art of Cloning, for example, having that many restrictions makes sense, but also towards the end of the battle it is kind of annoying that even if there are no allied reinforcements left, but there is still a shadow double with Goemon on the field, she will not be able to use Art of Cloning until all the shadow doubles died, and that might not give her that window to use the Art of Cloning, which might be on purpose, but maybe they were a bit too afraid of going too far with this Goemon, which could very well break the game a little bit, and so they held back a little bit, which is also noticeable in the damage dealings, as we said before. Now, despite all that, she can offer some value. Especially interesting, I think she is if you have a lot of stealth units in your team. I mean, nowadays we have all kinds of stealth units. We have Stealth Sun, we have Stealth Sleep, we have regular stealth, I guess. We have all, well, Stealth Poison, all possible combinations, which usually don't work very well next to each other, but you know, in subsequent platoons are usually placed. Then these shadow doubles become kind of interesting, I think, because then at all times, sometimes you have these shadow doubles coming in, quickening your stealthy units, maybe supporting them a little with the stealth flank, and given that in an arena team, these shadow doubles will be much more spread out, the Fireworks skill will also be much more likely to add yet another shadow double to reinforcements, so the cloning abilities will be improved there. Now that is for Arena. For War, I think her potential is actually higher. This seems more geared towards War. Unlike Odin, she doesn't really have any requirement for the number of reinforcements, and her speed is very high, so I think the likelihood of her pulling off the art of cloning even in defense should be pretty good, especially because she has that kind of get turn mechanic. So yeah, Goemon, a unit that can at least work with many units, so that's a plus, mainly stealth units of course. She might also be a unit that can help you turn a battle around towards the end, and she might also be a unit that might get better if she stays relevant for longer than Cthulhu. So if there is something that makes Cthulhu fall out of the Platoon 1 meta, Goemon's starting value increases automatically. You also saw in the example battle that she does very decent against burn teams. Okay, I think I failed again with keeping this analysis short. We are already at 5 AM now. But yeah, I hope you enjoyed that video. Leave a like if you did. It really helps a lot. I much appreciate it. Subscribe for more Evertale content. And as always, thanks for watching.